Thank you so much. Okay. Hey, everybody. My name is Haley Wood with the National Farmers Union. I am a food safety project coordinator with the local food safety collaborative, and I'm thrilled to join you in this series that we have with the LFSC called Lunch and Learn. These are meant to be kind of informal and informational sessions for the food safety community, and we're thrilled to be talking with Dr. Cheryl Murphy today. I'm also joined by my two colleagues, Catherine and Billy. Did y'all want to give an introduction or say hi?
Hey everyone, I'm Billy McCarthy. I'm the Food Safety Project Manager here at National Farmers Union. Also a small farmer myself, run my family farm with my wife in northern Baltimore County, Maryland. Mixed produce, cut flowers, and a flock of sheep. So food safety issues are near and dear to our hearts, both in all of our professional pursuits. And I'm really excited for this conversation today, and thank you all for joining us.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm also a food safety project coordinator. Really looking forward to this talk. Thanks, Cheryl, for being here. If you all are interested in more food safety media that we have, you could check out our website. And we also have a podcast called The Food Safety Dish that we have a whole season up online where we can find podcasts. So I'll turn it over to Haley and we'll get started.
Yay, all right. So I'll let Cheryl give an introduction in a second, but Dr. Cheryl Murphy is a distinguished professor in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife at Michigan State University, and she is renowned for her pioneering work in environmental ecotoxicology and currently leads the Center for PFAS Research, addressing PFAS contamination issues. And Dr. Murphy bridges diverse disciplines to address critical environmental challenges and also focuses on how information at the individual level translates to higher biological organization. That's our formal introduction, but welcome, Cheryl. And can you give us your own introduction of yourself and what drew you into PFAS work?
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction and for hosting me today. I'm happy to talk with you all. Yeah, I'm a professor in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife at MSU, and I'm also director of the Center for PFAS Research. And what got me into PFAS research per se, basically my research program is directed towards improving the way we do toxicity, not just on humans, but on the thousands and millions of species that are out there. And so basically, with the advent of the discovery of this phenomenon called endocrine disruption, where these hormones, compounds can act like hormones and disrupt like normal processes that are occurring within organisms. The toxicity framework really wasn't designed to accommodate that. So most of my work is trying to improve the way we do that so that we can incorporate all these subtle and sublethal effects that maybe show up in organisms like 10 years later or something, or at later stages, and try to improve our understanding of toxicity and how even complex mixtures occur, how they interact with organisms. And so when I started looking at this, so basically the idea is to move from how do we test thousands of chemicals on millions of species, means a overhaul of our toxicity framework. And then when the PFAS issue started coming down the line, I'm like, this is the perfect problem to focus on. So that's what I focused on in that, because there's thousands of these PFAS molecules where we know very little about, and it's occurring on thousands of species. And so how the center came about at MSU was basically Michigan was finding PFAS around the state and its drinking water. It seemed to be pretty widespread. And so we approached our administration and said, let's do something about this. As a land-grant institution, we should do something about this. And so we formed a small working group to figure out what research we could do to help the state as they're finding all this PFAS. And we quickly realized that it was a problem that was much bigger than any one individual. And we thought a center would be appropriate to tackle this issue. And so we united all sorts of different disciplines to tackle the program. We became a college, a university level center with involvement from 9 different colleges and also the Fraunhofer Center. And the things that we decided that we would focus on was, first of all, identifying all the PFAS that are in the environment. We can measure some of them, and it's still really expensive to measure some of them, but we can only measure them in a certain few matrices. So we need to figure out how to measure thousands of these chemicals and millions of matrices, like milk and cheese and all of this stuff, and figure out cheaper and better ways to do that. So that's a big research thrust of our center. We have to figure out what the health impacts are of these, and not just on humans. So that's where my research and looking more at a systems toxicology, high throughput, new approaches to sort of tackle what do we think the health impacts are. We need to figure out, that's a research area of our center. We have another research area of our center, which is looking at tracking it through the environment and modeling how it's moving through the environment, through our water, through our soils, and into organisms. And then also another big thrust of our center is food safety. How, given that PFAS seems to be in a lot of different places, how do we keep our food supply safe? Two other areas are risk associated with risk, and one is risk assessment. So how do we associate risk to these chemicals that have a lot of uncertainty, and how do we communicate that risk effectively? And another one is, how do we clean up? How do we clean up this and find safer alternatives? There's a reason why we're using these molecules, because we like them. And I think one strategy to try to sort of limit our reliance on these chemicals is to come up with safer alternatives. And so MSU's got a strong packaging department. So if we thought we could use some of their expertise as well. So that's our center, and we have about 40 and something growing. Plus we wanted to be a sort of a unified presence to be able to talk to our state and federal partners and be sort of a collaboration hub with people that would like to work with us.
Wow, that is amazing. It seems like once, kind of PFAS was indicated, it really needed to become a multidisciplinary approach, and having all hands on deck with something like this. And I'm glad you talked a little bit about your department and the center, because I want to jump in to explain what PFAS are. And I know it's perfluoroalkyl substances. I might be butchering that. But what are they, and where are they found, basically?
Sure. They're per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. That's what it is. And what are they? They're basically molecules like carbon that's bound to fluorine. Okay, so carbon that's bound to fluorine molecules. The carbon fluorine bond is like one of the strongest chemical bonds out there. It takes a lot to break it down. Like, I think you have to incinerate it at 1800 degrees centigrade to break it. So it's a very strong bond. A lot of these, the legacy PFAS contaminants you'll hear about are PFOS and PFOA, PFOS and PFOA. And these are characterized by having 8 carbons in a row, and then there's fluorine attached to all of them, and then they have some side groups. Okay, so these chemicals, because of their structure, excuse me, because of their structure, what they do is they have a hydrophobic port to it and a hydrophilic. So one likes water, one is repelled by water. And so those properties are really, really what we like. That's what we use them for repelling water, repelling grease, putting out firefighting foams, all of those things. And because they're so stable and hard to break down, they're like perfect for something like firefighting foams, right? But because they're so resistant to degradation, so they don't resist, they resist degradation. And so as a result, they go out into the environment and they don't break down. So they're continuously being built up in our environment. And because of their properties, which we like a lot, we use it so that we don't get grease on our clothes from handling a hamburger or something like that, or using in our tent so that we don't get wet from rain. But it's the hydrophilic part. There's another part of our biology that really has that as well, and it's our cell membranes. So all of our cell membranes also have a hydrophilic part. And so these molecules like to sort of, that's home for them. They'll just sit there, like, this feels like home. I have both my parts feel happy, but they also seem to like to bind to proteins as well. And then also because of their hydrophilic parts, they transport really easily through water. So like the hydrophilic part will go through water and it'll stick up the tail, and it'll just go through water really, 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 really easily. And that's why I think when you have a lake that's contaminated with it, if you get some wind, it'll whip it all up into like this big foam on top of lakes and things like that. So those are what those molecules are. And there's two legacy ones, the PFAS and PFOA, but those have been phased out. But there's so many different iterations, and they can be branched or whatever, and they can be shorter chains and other things. And there's so many. There's like they estimate over 10,000 different variations on those that are now being used.
Okay, so that's a lot. So it's basically it's explaining a chemical bond, and PFAS generally, it's a environmentally it's one of the strongest bonds, and it's also attracted to cell membranes. Is that my understanding?
They like to sit in cell membranes that bind to proteins, and they'll transport through water very easily, and in our air, everything. Wow. So they like interfaces. They like the surface air interface, soil, air. They like interfaces. Wow. Because they have, yeah.
Okay, that's incredible. So how did PFAS chemicals become more widely used? I guess what led to the rise in use? We talked a little bit about some really common uses like flame retardants, clothing. I've even also heard like food wrapping, and like to-go wrapping is a popular one. I guess if you know any history about it, could you talk a little bit what led to rise in the use of them?
They were built in the Manhattan Project, and they decided that it wasn't appropriate for that use, but they found that it had this other property, and that's when the Teflon pan came about. So they were built during the Manhattan Project for something else, and it wasn't suitable for that, but they said, oh, look at these properties. And so that's when they started using it for Teflon and other things. And so that's how it started. And they're really inexpensive, relatively inexpensive, and very effective at really low concentrations. And so we tend to use them in everything. They're in guitar strings, they're in ski wax, they're in everything that we use. There's pretty much.
Well, would you say it kind of came around the same time as single-use plastics, like kind of that same timeline?
It's probably matches. I mean, maybe even earlier than single-use pack. I think single-use plastic started when? In the 70s? 80s?
Yeah, I think late 60s, sometime around then.
Yeah, so these would have started in the 40s, 50s.
Wow. What do we know so far about health concerns related to PFAS? As a community, what are some of the top concerns, maybe from your perspective or your opinion?
So two of these chemicals that I've talked about before, PFAS and PFOA, those are the carbon 8, so they have 8 carbons. Those chemicals, we've been studying them for 30 years, and we're starting to find out that they do have some toxic effects. They've been linked. I think the most sensitive endpoint is immunity, so immune function. So they seem to disrupt our ability to respond to vaccines, maybe leading to some autoimmune diseases and allergies and things like that. So that seems to be the most sensitive endpoint. They're also linked to some cancers like kidney cancers and testicular cancers, and metabolic disorders. Those are some of the ones that they do, but those are for 2 chemicals. We're starting to look at some of the other ones that we can measure, and they have different toxicity patterns. And so the problem with this chemical is it doesn't act via one certain mechanism. So what we call them systemic toxicants, or general messer-uppers, basically, because they go in and they invade your cell membranes, they bind to proteins, it seems, and they'll just disrupt things that we can't it's really hard because we can't figure out their pattern of toxicity, and because all of these chemicals are very different from one to another, it's really hard to categorize what their health effects are.
So yeah, it doesn't really follow, doesn't really have any rules, it seems like, in how they target, human cells and kind of the fallout from that.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't found them yet. I think the problem with it is that these chemicals operate very differently than other chemicals that we're used to working with. And we've been throwing the tools that we've developed for other chemicals at this problem, and we don't have a clear picture about how they're working yet. So
When you say you're testing these chemicals, are you testing specific chains, or is it like a specific number? How many chemicals do you test when you're looking at a sample size? Or yeah, I'm curious about that.
So generally a toxicity test, they'll use one chemical at a time.
Okay.
And they'll just do an increasing dose of that chemical and then determine if there's any effects of that you would see. So just a second, sorry, my dog got into something.
No worries.
Sorry about that. There's toilet paper all over the
Oh
place.
no. No worries. If you need a second, it's totally okay.
It's okay. So I have a new puppy, sorry. They just decided to get into toilet paper.
Perfect timing.
So where was I? Where did I leave off?
We were talking about testing one chemical at a time and
Oh yeah,
these toxicology reports.
yeah, but we can only really measure reliably 40 of them, and so and we're starting to look at some of the other ones, and the toxicity tests are really expensive and labor intensive, and really don't give us a handle of what's actually happening. They give us some ideas, but so there has to be we have to do this a little bit faster and more efficiently. So there's some high throughput testing, like using robots and a bunch of assays and things like that. That's sort of new technology that's being proposed to sort of tackle a problem like PFAS. And it's new. Regulatory agencies haven't wholly embraced that approach. They like the older approach, but we sort of need these new approaches to sort of move forward in figuring out how cause and effect, essentially.
Yeah, like you said, trying to basically create a whole new framework to approach these. It seems pretty novel in their impact, so it would make sense you have to kind of try to find the trail of patterns to go outside of what's already been done. I would love to move on to maybe thinking about PFAS in the context of agriculture and where we might find typical hotspots, or concentrations of PFAS in a farm environment, because a lot of our members are working with farmers or are farmers themselves.
Yeah.
What do you think
Absolutely.
about that?
There's a number of ways PFAS can show up in agricultural settings. One way is if they live near a contaminated site and they're getting water from that contaminated site. For example, like usually a lot of Air Force bases or whatever they use, or airports or whatever, or even some industries, they'll use a lot of, like, for example, AFFF, which is it's called aqueous film forming foams. So it's this firefighting foam was used quite extensively on all of these air bases and things for training and whatsoever. And all of that was washed into the environment, and often near Air Force bases or airports, you'll often find heavily contaminated water. And if that water was applied to your farms, or that's your source of water for your farms, that's one way to get it into your agricultural system. You can also get it from other industries. It's not just that, like, for example, pulp and paper mill industries, or there's like in Michigan, there's like a shoe tannery that, you know, like making like waterproof shoes, things like that. So it depends. Or chrome plating, for example. You could have like a lot of the auto industry, a lot of plating industries. So those industries can discharge these types of contaminants into the water as well. It could also get into the water through like leaching from like landfills and other stuff as well. So basically, if you're in an agricultural system, if you were using water that's contaminated with PFAS, that's one way it'll get into your system. Another way is that's emerging right now that we haven't got a full handle on is biosolid application. So sometimes a lot of these, like I'll just give an example here in Michigan. There's a wastewater treatment plant that was receiving industrial waste from a chrome plating company. And so that chrome plating company all of its waste was full of PFAS, and it went into the biosolid fields, and the wastewater treatment plant was selling the biosolids to farmers. And so farmers have biosolids that apply biosolids to their farms. There's one case here, for example, in Michigan, he's applied it and it's gone up into his crops, which he fed his cattle, and his cattle is all contaminated. So that's another way to get it. Some legacy pesticides, some older pesticides had some PFAS as a part of their formulation, but also the containers that held the pesticides also have PFAS in them. And I guess the other way to get it is through packaging, probably. So
It seems like proximity to industry and water are kind of the bigger concerns when it comes to, I guess, direct contamination. Yeah,
and the biosolids, the biosolids, they estimate somewhere between 5 to 10% of our farmland in the US has had biosolids applied that may or may not have PFAS in them. So
wow. Yeah, I just found out about the rancher in Michigan who used the biosolids, maybe a few months ago before contacting you about this. And it is pretty wild to have an impact like that directly. I know a lot of people are, concerned about that. What do you find are maybe some mitigation strategies that currently exist, if any, when it comes to soil contamination?
yeah.
Thinking about what people can do to kind of.
Yeah, so it depends on the source of contamination and where it's coming from. So there have been some farmers in Maine, for example, that found that they have PFAS contamination, and they found the source to be this water source, and they can put filters on and stop that. So that's one way to get rid of it. However, in the soils, it's a little harder. Okay, it's hard to get it out of the soils. There's a lot of research that's being done to try to figure out how to do that. One would be there's just a number of ones. You can dilute it out with compost. That's one thing that's people been suggesting. There's been some suggestions to use biochar, sort of put into the soil so that binds to the PFAS and keeps it there, so you can't move it. Other types of sorbents have been suggested, but they haven't been field tested yet. Where you actually just apply these sorbents, the PFAS stays absorbed to those sorbents, and it doesn't go into the plants, right? So that just keeps it immobilized in the soil, and it don't go anywhere. But sometimes that'll also bind the nutrients too. So there has to be a little bit of a research to figure out what the best way to do with that. Other things that people have proposed is like excavating it, like for example, just digging it up and put it into landfill somewhere, but the landfills now are not taking it. So because it'll leach out of the landfill eventually and get back into the system. So those are that. And then other people suggest soil washing, where you run a sorbent or a solvent through your soil and get the washing from that, but that kills everything that's in the soil, all the microbes and all of that stuff. So in soils, it's a little harder. There's still a lot of research that's being done to figure out things like farmers that have PFAS heavily contaminated soils. Some of the options might be to maybe I think they're suggesting like some crops may not take up PFAS. So like corn, for example, is looking like the corn kernels don't take up PFAS. So if you're feeding cows, you might want to switch to corn or something. Or other types of research could be switching to your crop to ornamentals or something that people don't eat or whatever. So there's still so much that has to be done in this particular area to figure out what we can do with contaminated water and soil in farms. And so we're just starting to scratch the surface on what can be done.
And do we, this is a follow-up question. Do we know if specific groups of crops take up PFAS and avoid them? I know you mentioned corn, but are there any hard and fast rules about that?
I think the more protein, so like they're finding like leafy vegetables and things seem to take up PFAS more than say, corn or I mean, it seems like potatoes and asparagus don't pick them up for some reason. So it's just, but we still have to do a lot more research in that area.
Before we talk about some of the future implications, I was going to ask Billy and Catherine if y'all had any follow-up questions so far.
I do have a question about like this. I know like in places like Maine, there have been, I guess like the biosludge or like the sewage sludge has been like a thing from municipalities. And I'm kind of wondering like, what are the actions that these either like municipalities or local or even the federal government are taking to kind of counteract maybe some of the PFAS that are in place, or is that still something that needs a lot more work on there?
What Maine has done is they banned biosolids. You're not allowed to use biosolids at all. But then that leaves us with another problem of what do you do with the biosolids? And so, yeah, so there's that. What Michigan has done, I think, is started to put like a post discharge sort of treatment. So you have before the company can, if they find out that your industry is discharging all this PFAS in its waste, they have to do some pre-filtering, whatever, to get rid of it before you put it into the actual into that. So before it goes into the wastewater treatment plant. Those are some of the things. And then I think what has to happen probably at some point is some sort of like, so Maine put a ban on all biosolids. Some states will probably only accept biosolids to be applied at some certain level or some, and I imagine in the beginning it'll be higher, but it'll start to go down and down and down and down and stuff like that. So what you see with the water situation, basically we're allowed 70 parts per trillion, and now it's down to 4 parts per trillion. So I mean, it's just going to continue to go down and down. So it's regulations. Each state does its own thing. Hopefully more states start to get on board and start to do it. And then usually after you get a few more states on board, then it becomes a federal thing. Generally, that's usually how it kind of works. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yes, I definitely think that does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions, Billy?
I see we have a few questions in the chat. Do we want to save those for later in the conversation, or?
Yeah, I think we can get to some questions maybe after this next section. So if anybody
Sounds
has
good.
questions, you go ahead and type those in and we'll look at those. My question, Cheryl, so something that stood out to me when I heard you talk at IAFP in Toronto was that you mentioned PFAS was considered one of the biggest public health concerns before COVID-19 emerged in 2020, and PFAS are still pretty unregulated. I wanted to hear you talk a bit about that and kind of what that means for research and our continued unadvised interactions with these chemicals.
Yeah, it's slow to come, but it's starting to. I think they have that proposed drinking water MCLs, maximum contaminant loads from the EPA has been proposed to be 4 parts per trillion, which is basically just that detection limit, so basically if the instrument can detect it, then it shouldn't be there. And so that's what's being proposed. It's all been advisory up until now. And so that'll be the first set of regulations that come here. In the US, the European Union is taking a much stronger stance, and they are regulating things in water, but also in food. They're taking a hard look at foods, and they have some regulations put in place for foods. And so basically what has happened is like the states start to take it into their own hands. So we had a 70 parts per trillion advisory level from the EPA for the longest time. Then like a handful of states said that's way too high, and they started coming up with their own levels, which were much lower. And now the federal level is starting to do that. And it's going to happen probably the same way with food, I think. Does that? And so, but we do need a federal thing, like, because then some states don't even look for it. So if you take a look, there's like this environmental working group it sort of tracks across where all the levels of PFAS are found. And you can see there's some states that there's a lot of PFAS, and then there's lots of empty ones that don't have any PFAS at all. But as what we know about PFAS, it doesn't stop at borders. And so it's likely in a lot of different places. And so that means if the state isn't mandate to test it, it might not, if it doesn't have the resources or whatever. And then that means it's a sort of an environmental justice issue, because there's going to be a lot of people that aren't getting necessary testing to see if their health is impacted, or their water, or their food. Does that help? Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like at the state level, it still holds a lot of weight right now, while the federal government is kind of working past the advisory stage. And I think I've seen a statistic that level you talked about, the maximum contaminant load, that's about a few drops in like a swimming pool's worth. Is that about right for
Yeah.
comparison?
Yeah,
Yes, that's not a lot.
No, it's not. And there's some places where it's higher than that in the rainwater. So so yeah. So yeah. So basically what has to happen is we have to get federal guidelines put in. Really, that's the way to move this along quickly. So yeah.
And do you see PFAS as a public health crisis, and where do you see PFAS heading, I guess, from your research or things you're seeing?
It's a problem because we do have these health effects. There's a lot of chemicals that we have no idea what they do that are considered in this class. And what we're finding is some of these precursors, so some of the earlier, like smaller chain ones, precursors, they'll combine to form these more toxic ones in wastewater treatment plants. They'll biotransform into the more toxic ones that we see. So we just don't have it. So the issue is, like, we love these chemicals so much, but if we don't stop using them the way we're using them, they're just going to continue to build up to be at really, really high levels that for everybody, right? Every single one of us is contaminated with these chemicals, every single one. Some are more contaminated with others, but what is the acceptable level? We don't know yet. But if we don't stop doing something about it, we're all going to be really heavily contaminated, because they're just being deposited in the environment without any regulations on them. So does that make sense?
It does. Can you explain bioaccumulation with PFAS in the human body, or just in, species, what that looks like?
So basically, they just kind of build up in the environment, and they're not excreted very fast. So basically, since they don't break down, so these chemicals really don't break down, they get into your body and they just sit there. And so the more you take in, the more, so the half-life, for example, of PFAS in humans is about 5 years. So it takes about 5 years for you to get rid of half of it. And if you're constantly intaking it, you're going to keep building it up way past the drinking level waters that you're exposed to. You're going to get a lot more in your body than what's in your environment. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And is this is that the same across the border? Is it different for children and elderly people, or is it an immune I guess, does it
I think
depend?
this more sensitive population is probably the children and the developing children, and their immune systems are developing and they're getting exposed to this immunotoxicant. So that's a big concern.
Mm.
There's some studies that suggest that they're really in not responsive to vaccines or anything like
Wow.
that. So they might not necessarily, you might not see an effect right off the bat, like they're not killing them or whatever immediately because of these exposures, but then if they get a disease, they might have a much more severe reaction to the disease than the regular person would be, and that might lead to some sort of death or other type of other health implications down the line, you know? So
Yeah. And I think from what we already know very little about the health impacts, it is kind of a big question and a little bit of a scary question to think about what more we'll find out about them. And
yeah.
thinking about bioaccumulation and just kind of all the unknowns still, because I'm just so fascinated by, this seems like a really tricky chemical problem because we just don't have the framework to really kind of Rubik's it all together. We just don't know. Yeah, a lot of uncertainty with this, it feels like.
And you have to be careful because there's so much uncertainty. So then how do you communicate the risk properly? And then how do you do that so that people just say, well, it's everywhere, so I don't care about it anymore. Like how do you do that? So, I mean, I think the most important thing is we just don't want to keep it building up. I mean, it will, if it still keeps building up, it will be toxic to everybody, So,
Right.
yeah. So
I know there are probably a few questions here from the listeners, and I also want to know, how people can stay in touch with your work at MSU, and also maybe how people can kind of springboard into PFAS a little bit, maybe some guidance about doing their own research.
sure, I'll give you my, just a second. So here's our website. Put that in the chat. So here's our website, and then you can see what our scientists are doing, and there's a number of scientists there that you could contact directly if you think that they have a relevant expertise that you'd be interested in. We have events and things that you're always welcome to attend. Yeah, I think that would be, yeah, just I would reach out, go to our website, and if you're thinking about getting into research, like, yeah, you can give us a call, like send us an email, and we'll see if we can connect you with the right people to help you get started. So,
And you just did your symposium, which we just missed. Is that going to be an annual
yeah,
gathering?
actually, yeah, so we are doing something a little different. We are focusing on themes, and so the first year we did it, we focused on remediation and high throughput toxicity testing, and it was reasonably successful for the first time through. So this last year we decided to do it on agriculture because we had that farm in Michigan, and we thought we don't know too much. Let's figure out what we can learn. And we applied for this grant for the USDA, and lo and behold, a letter of intent, and University of Maine had also done too, and they've done a lot of work in this area too. So they said, like, why don't you work together? So we said yes, and we did, because that's what we've noticed about this problem. You're more effective if we work together, because it's so multidisciplinary and complex that we actually do need to collaborate across a lot of disciplines and different interests and things like that. So yeah, we hosted it on agriculture, and it was really successful. We had farmers talk about their experiences. We had all levels of government, tribal governments, stakeholders. We had trade associations, we had farm bureaus all there. It was a really good conversation. And so we're hoping to continue that. And our next theme next year will be on our Great Lakes resource. We want to sort of figure out, so because the fish in the Great Lakes seem to be more contaminated than other fish. And so we want to try to figure out how do we protect our Great Lakes resource from PFAS contamination. So,
And that's our biggest freshwater resource in the country. So that makes
yeah.
sense. I'm before I go to some questions here in the chat, Billy and Catherine, do you have any last questions or thoughts? Okay. Yeah, and I just something that came up a few minutes ago is just this question of like, how do you communicate risk with uncertainty? I think that's something I'll be thinking about after this conversation. And
You have to
I
do
do,
it carefully.
yeah, carefully. And the importance also of sharing experiences. You know, that's a huge touch point in agriculture, is that farmers understand what's going on in their fields and
Mhm.
some of the things that they're seeing. And I want to jump into a few questions, unless you have anything else you'd like to share before we dive in.
Well, I think with the farmers, what we found too also with our symposium is that you're going to communicate risk, but you also have to have some solutions in place. Otherwise, they won't be willing participants because they don't want to have everything. So it's a really horrible situation for the farmers if they're not trying to have toxic food. They want to have good, nutritious food. But if testing on their land means you get shut down and there's no repercussion, there's nothing that comes from it. You just get shut down with nothing. That's not a viable option. So there's like safety nets that have to be put in place while you're communicating risk and helping them find solutions. That's a very necessary component. That's what we found. So
Right. And the farmers balance so much already. It's really hard when you become aware of a problem and you approach and say, well, we don't really have a solution, but we have.
And it's not of their doing either, that nobody's
Right.
really intending to put PFAS contaminated land, in their food. So yeah. So
Yeah, no way. Someone had a question about drinking water, and they asked if is it a big issue if your drinking water comes from rivers? Just a general question.
so the people that are the way we get contaminated, so the most contaminated the people that are around contaminated sites like Air Force bases or whatever, those people have been mostly contaminated through their drinking water, and that they could be pretty high. But some states have stepped in and put in filters and things like that. But if it's not hasn't been tested or anything, that could be the biggest source. The rest of us get our contamination through our food.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I knew water was one of the biggest ones, but I guess I didn't realize food was the second one.
Yeah.
I guess this is also a question. We have a lot of household objects, or a lot of furniture is made with retardants. All
Mhm.
these things. Is it more of an impact to ingest it rather than just having it
Yeah.
in your,
And
yeah?
then so the flame retardant carpets and things, it's of concern for, for like little babies that kind of crawl around on the carpets and then they put their hands in their mouth,
Gotcha.
or cats or dogs that kind of live near the bottom so they tend to have, there seems to be a sort of a correlation with carpets, flame retardant carpets, and thyroid
Mhm.
cancers in cats and things like that. So yeah.
Someone asked, this is relevant to the question about Air Force and air bases. What are the likely consequences for federal regulation when you have someone like the U.S. Defense saying that they're dependent on PFAS chemicals?
Yeah, so I think the Department of Defense has been investing a lot into this issue right now. They have a lot of grants that they're looking to try to develop uh, fire retardant foams that do not contain fluorine. There's been a big push into that. And I think there's been a push into like essential use. So they only use it if you're going to lose your life or limbs or something, and maybe also some proper cleanups and stuff like that. So if the federal government regulates it, I think those types of measures will be put in place by the Department of Defense, I imagine. So I don't know for sure though. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question? Yeah.
it's an interesting question because it is curious for those industries that rely heavily on PFAS, what the next steps are, like what the solution is for them
Yeah.
to transition.
Yeah. So there is a lot of research into fluorine-free firefighting foams, and so I know I think they're trying to get a prototype up and running now. I mean, they've been investing a lot into that. But I think some of the states, I think, have been like, okay, if you're going to use it, you only use it for loss of life or loss of limbs or whatever. But you don't use it for training anymore, because that's what it was used, a lot of training. And maybe we just figure out and once you use it, maybe then you find a better way of like cleaning it up afterwards and things like that too. So yeah.
This is another question, and our team can also chime in too. Does the new water rule by USDA address this issue of PFAS?
There's a new water one that's coming down the line.
Yeah, I don't think the rules have been released yet. I'm pretty sure.
They've been
Yeah,
advisory, right? But they still have to go into effect. They haven't been, but they originally had some guidelines at parts per quadrillion, and they had to come back to go to parts per trillion, because that's when we can't even measure it at the levels that they had before. So they're going at detection limits. So once that goes into effect, then that's a law, right? So that's the first PFAS law, and I think it's expected to go through at some point, but I'm sure there's a lot of pushback and back and forth. So
yeah. There is one question, and if you are still in here, Noah, it's this question. It might need to be rephrased, but I'm trying to figure out how to read this question. I don't know if you can see it, Cheryl in the chat.
It's a solution to remove from soil.
Yeah. Noah, if you want to come off of mute and ask your question, that would be fine as well.
It's better to remove it from the water than it is to get it into. It's harder to remove it from soils.
I don't know if that answered their question or not, but hopefully that's what they were curious about.
So like there's a lot of filters and things that you can use, but the filters will still have the PFAS in them. It's not destroyed, so you'd have to put the filters containing PFAS. They'll also have to be destroyed at some point, you know.
Right.
So
That's it's an interesting example with the biochar as well. It's kind of just more of like a holding chamber for these chemicals. They don't actually go anywhere. Also, I don't know if we asked this, how long does it take for PFAS to naturally
I don't know. I don't really have a natural degradation. I mean, some of it gets biotransformed a little bit, but it really doesn't. I mean, we can excrete it from our systems if we're on clean food and clean water, but for it to naturally break down.
Yeah. Because you mentioned that chemicals, the strike between that, it's kind of more, it has to be a little bit more invasive to get rid of it rather than just let it naturally go about its way. Yeah.
And there's no microbe that, I mean, people have some suggestions of some microbe that could potentially, but if there was one, we would have found it. If there was an easy one, we would have found it by now, but I think they're still looking. There's a lot of microbes and variations that you can do, but it's going to take a while. There doesn't seem to be a magic bullet to destroying. I think to destroy PFAS takes a bunch of different depending on the situation that you're in, it'll take a number of different technologies to destroy it.
I think that there aren't any more audience questions. So I think we can finish up here. I'm feeling.
I have a question, please.
Oh, sure thing, Carmen.
I want to know if there is a test. Is there some type of when I'm looking at urban, because I work with a lot of urban farmers and small farmers. And is there, and especially in Michigan and in the Chicago area, well, Illinois, along that corridor going up towards Lake Superior, where 3M used to have all of those factories where they manufactured stuff and the PFAS was found there years ago. It's in the if it's a forever chemical, does it ever dissipate? And is there any test that a farmer could, or a grower could use. Simply because, and the reason why this is so interesting for me is because the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, they compost it and they allow it to be used by the small farmers and the gardeners within the area. And if it's in the soil, is there any way for them to test or to have a test to be able to know just how much is there?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's still like to develop a cost-effective test that's still underway, but we actually have a grant proposal in to try to scale, but it's not developed yet. But you can take soil samples and get them analyzed at labs. Unfortunately, it's around like $300 a sample usually. But we have an analytical lab that can analyze soils and things like that. So you'd have to go to a commercial lab or something and just take your soil sample in to get it tested that way. There has to be more research on figuring out how to measure this more effectively and to bring the costs down so that most people can afford it. So there is ways to measure it though. It's not that cheap.
It's not like getting a test to see your organic matter or your macro nutrients. It's maybe not as easy, but it does exist, it sounds like.
Yeah, you can. And I think there's a lot of research being done right now to figure out how to make it cheaper and easier to do. So it's just that we haven't developed the technology yet to do that. So
I think we have time for one or two more questions before we wrap up. Mark's asked is it possible to recycle and reuse PFAS that's captured in filters?
it'll be captured in filters, yeah. Whether or not to reuse it, I don't think people generally reuse it. I've heard of some proposals of like trying to capture it into fungus and use that to like, I don't know. Anyway, it hasn't been used. I haven't seen very many people try to reuse it, but it can be captured. It'll just stay there though. But whether or not you can, yeah. Does that make sense? So
Yeah, I think that's a curious question to see if it can be recycled.
recycled instead of remaking it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't need to make more. Yeah, I think for essential, I think, yeah, whether, so that's the thing, right? All our products are cheap right now, though we use these chemicals, but like if we start to reuse them, all the prices of our goods are going to go up. And so is that something that an industry would want to do? The incentives, I think it requires a bit of restructuring of our system.
That could be a curious future topic, the economics of PFAS and how that gets factored into so many things that we rely on day to day.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
Any other questions for Cheryl?
It looked like there is a question about basically if filters that are on the market or like a municipal water filter, would those filter PFAS, or do you need kind of a more heavy duty filter to filter out these chemicals?
Yeah, so some GAC, granulated active charcoal will filter out most of the longer chain ones, like the C8s and stuff like that. And then some resins will get out the smaller chains. So those types of systems plus like reverse osmosis and things like that will probably, but you'll still have it contained and you'll have to recharge. You'll have to change out your materials in your filters because it'll just build up in there. So.
Okay. I think that might be it. I'll give anybody a last chance.
Are we going to store all the waste PFAS in filters? I think that's where we have to develop remediation technology to destroy it. So I think you can go and incinerate it at 1800 degrees
Right.
Celsius, and then it'll be gone.
I'm walking away from this conversation feeling really curious, also a little, admittedly a little fearful, but also hopeful that more conversations are happening in this space around food and water and PFAS specifically. And I'm just really grateful you were able to spend this afternoon with us. And I know it's been really busy for you because a lot of people are interested in this topic. So thanks
No,
for being
thank you.
here.
No, thanks for the invitation. It was my pleasure. So, yeah. All right.
Well, I think that concludes everything, Billy.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag, if you have a topic that you'd like us to cover in a future lunch and learn, please reach out to myself or Haley or Catherine, anyone on the NFU food safety team. We're looking forward to it. Catherine, thank you for dropping the survey there.
Yeah, to make it easier, we have a survey that you can directly answer these questions. You can let us know how you liked the event today and things you might want to hear about in the future. So definitely let us know if you have anything on your mind.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
Is
so
there
much,
anything
everyone.
is there anything you wanted to plug, Cheryl? Anything coming up or you?
I think we're having a symposium next year if you want to learn about the Great
Great.
Lake. So
Yeah. Keep that on
Sounds like-
everybody's radars.
yeah,
Well, thank you
please reach
so
out.
much.
Yeah. Please reach out if you have any questions. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining, everyone.